Thor, as we know, that's on Marvel stuff, is Jupiter. It's very interesting that they hold him in high esteem in a lot of these Marvel movies, right? And then Frigg is Venus. So, Twee is Mars. So, now we can see where we get names Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So we still got these names of these gods in our mouths, right? Like it's hard to go around and say today is fourth day, right? So because it's not, people don't understand that. So that's another reason why it's important for us to understand our own calendars and our own seasons that Yah has given us to point back to prophecy going to the last days.
Yeah, wonderful time for us to come together, learn who we are, get another great movie.
Lesson for today. So we've been talking a lot about the holy days, the biblical holy days, why it's so important for Yah for us to actually celebrate these days and how that connects us back to Him. So if we go to the next slide, we see how there's different things that we've been teaching. So you can see there around the bottom, you see calendar, the Moedims, the appointed times. And we went through the calendar. We talked about the Shabbat. We talked about the mandatory and the other feast days. And now we're going to talk about some of the American Christianized European holidays, right? So that's what, if you probably saw some of the titles, spiritual, pagan, unholy days is what I call them. And we have to understand, as you scroll down and look for the one that has the, American holidays in there, count has a picture of all American holidays at the end, way down. So as like she's going through this, you can see how we went through a lot of these things about what does the meaning mean, how to look up the days and the different cycles, and how it actually connects all the way back to the Bible and some of the things that, well, everything that Yahusha has done for us or will do for us going forward. So it basically breaks down, why our culture is so important, because it connects us back to Yah, right? Like what He's trying to establish, His plan, His prophecy, His purpose of having us. So, why don't people keep these days, especially people that believe in the Bible, versus the holidays that we know came from European paganism, right? So, if you know about history, I think he even talked about King Hadrian. So, Hadrian was the one that actually went and kicked out all the Israelites and um, took the statue of Jupiter and he put it on the Temple Mount, right? And he basically called it a whole different name. So after his god, Capitolina, that's what capital got there right there. Capitolina, right? So that's Jupiter, connected back to Jupiter. So, he then had even some of the other people, some of the other Jews, that was more the I can't say that word right, Pharisees, they end up turning to rabbinical Judaism. A lot of them end up start writing about the, documenting stuff, writing down the Talmud start being documented, as well as, starts turning to that Masoretic text as well. That's modern, that's known today. There were some older ones that was found, similar stuff that was found in Dead Sea Scrolls, but they said they wanted to put the dots and the vowel points and stuff like that. Some of the stuff that end up turning into what they call biblical Hebrew today. A lot of those things that has happened from then, they basically took different bishops and they basically put Gentile bishops in Jerusalem that was over the churches, and then it actually moved to Antioch, then it moved to Rome. So along with that, you have Constantine and a lot of stuff that has happened, and they mixed in the Bible with a lot of European, Greek, and Roman traditions. So as we are now knowing who we are, because through slavery we were taken to this culture. That's why I said we were taken to the British culture, right? And the British culture is connected to Europe. So even if you know about even the Holy Roman Empire, right? So that continues on in some of the nations that's there today. And they basically mixed in a lot of their beliefs, because remember, the Romans were the ones that killed Yahusha, right? They were pagans. So they're the ones that's there that's not even caring about what was going on in Jerusalem and all the people until it came to a point where people will start getting converted and they start following some of the Israelite king, right? Israel, Yahusha, right? So that's when it starts having some problems and difficulties, and that's where we got to this point. So that's how they get a lot of their holidays because they were still doing some of their pagan stuff and they were mixing in with the Bible. Just like I say, voodoo is actually a approved Christian religion. People don't realize that, but we got to understand that it's not something that we still should be doing. Just like the European pagan stuff. So here's some of the holidays. We're not going to cover all of them, unless just I try not to put too much shine on the devil, right? Like we can get so caught. Some people get so caught up and not trying to understand every little thing that they then become. It then becomes a distraction of what we should be doing, right? Like we can go up there, and if you really want to hold on to Christmas or to any of these holidays, you can go and justify anything, right? You can justify any kind of belief that you want. I think they had the little thing with the spaghetti monster god that you see on the cars, and it's crazy, like people following that. So people can follow anything they want to, but to look at the facts, right, is important. Understand where the tradition comes from, and then, from my standpoint, you also understand the spirit that came behind that, right? So we always say the spirit of Christmas, the spirit of all these different holidays. What's the spirit of these holidays? So when we start looking at their origins, initial origins, we can understand the paganism was something that was unholy. So now if we're still celebrating that, that's worship, right? Even if we say, the devil's having the birthday party, and I can say I don't believe in the devil, but if I go and celebrate it, go eat the food and be there, I'm part of the celebration, right? I'm part of the worship. Rather I acknowledge whose birthday it is or not, I'm still benefiting from it, right? So in the same sense, I feel like when you start doing involved in some of these pagan practices, these were pagan festivals, you're also opening yourself up to a spiritual thing as well. So when I first became understood who we were as Israelites, and I said I'm gonna start walking in it, I didn't think some of these things had problems, right? Like Mother's Day and Father. Who can be wrong about Mother's Day and Father's Day? What's so wrong about Thanksgiving? It has nothing to do with the Bible, or does it? Right? So if you start looking at what the original practice and why they did it and why they came up with the thing, I didn't even know Thanksgiving was a holiday before. I mean, the way that it was celebrated, it was a holiday before America was founded, right? Like that's strange, right? I thought Thanksgiving was with the Pilgrims. They came together and they ate a meal, right? Like how did that come before America? So you'll start seeing some of these things. So we want to go through some of these holidays. We're not going to put too much time into it because I feel like it's important for us to focus on the things of God and where we are. So I'm gonna give you enough so you can do your own research and look at it yourself. Or like me, like I don't have to know what so many facts before I start believing something. I usually start with a lot of these things like what do you believe? How do you basically understand information before you say something is true? What are the things you look at? Do you look at the primary sources? Do you look at the Bible? Do you look at archaeology? Do you try to understand where the beliefs and thoughts come from, the roots of them? Whatever that is, you need to come with that before you start going down any of these roads. So because if not, you would never believe in anything. Because I feel like now some people have the comfort of their mind and they don't want to walk outside of that, so they basically dismiss everything. A lot of times when we are understanding who we are as a people and coming into this research, you can find people that say that's not right. You're not an Israelite. Then you're like, okay, so what am I? They can't tell you, right? They can tell you what you're not, but they can't tell you what you are. In the same way, when it comes to the feast days, they can tell you, they'll start saying, oh, you shouldn't do it this way. You shouldn't do this. You shouldn't do that, right? You shouldn't do these feast days from the Bible. Like, that don't even make sense. You can't do the feast days from the Bible. But then they'll come into a point where they'll start saying these holidays, American holidays, is okay because, we got freedom to do what we want to do, right? Like freedom in Christ, they'll say. We've given grace. But yet then I'm like, okay, so it's all right to do these, but then is it okay to do voodoo? No, it's not right to do voodoo. So it's a racial thing, like based upon your race, you can celebrate certain holidays and you can't. So to me, that's a slave mind, once again, right? And this is not just me talking, I'm gonna show them maybe if we'll get to it today. There's Europeans that say this as well. That's coming out that understand the importance of the Bible. They know they're Gentiles, and they know they come from, like paganism, right? So in the same way, they, when Christianity was very popular and it was very Christian nationalist type of thing, right? It's like, oh, they had to go and convert those heathens in Africa, right? Like, oh, they're doing stuff that's wrong. We got to convert them. But even now, you see a lot of missionaries going to Africa. But how many missionaries are going to Europe? Where they're basically closing down churches and using the churches as a skate park or a beer kind of place. So it's like, wait a minute, what is truly going on, right? So I think it's more of a racial thing than it's actually a spiritual thing, because people want to hold on to the culture that we've been assimilated. It's just like our Israelite ancestors, right? They got assimilated into the culture of the Canaanites, and that's the reason why I say, Yah said, when you go there, clear out everybody, kill everything, the animals, the women, everything, clear it out, or those people are going to bring you back to that unspiritual worship. So now, here we are. We've been brought into this stuff. A lot of people don't even know. I have a older great aunt, and she was telling me how some of the stuff they didn't even do during, till later on, like Mother's Day and stuff, right? Like black people didn't celebrate a lot of these things. So we were, think about it, we were enslaved, right? So we didn't have the freedom to do a lot of these things, and then they start bringing us into their culture, especially here in America. Over and down in like Brazil and stuff, they still had the freedom to celebrate like they want to celebrate, there. But here in America, we're about forced to assimilate into their beliefs, right, into their ways of worship. And even though people did stuff by the river, and all people kind of did it, kind of hiding, but eventually, what did they do to get certain European to sit within our churches to listen what was going on? Because eventually they had Nat Turner, right, and Denmark Vesey, right, that said, "Oh, we the Israelites." So they start reading the Bible and start identifying with that thing. They said, "Oh, we got to be freed." And then they gave the slave Bible and ripped out certain parts of the Bible and stuff like that, right? So a lot of this is, what we have, what we're doing now is part of our slave culture. That's what I call it. Because in African Americans, we're very deeply rooted in our slave culture, right? What was given to us. We don't know who we were before slavery. Now we're part of, Greek frats, right? Greek sororities. A lot of those beliefs, like we're not Greek. Greeks tore us up if you really understood who we are as a people and what they did to our children, to our women, and even now the Bible even says that we were sold to the Greeks or the sons of Javan as well. So if you understand, the Bible and the table of nations and who we are, you understand why we're still under this mindset that we need to break free from. And they don't do Easter, at least they didn't do. They're starting to even being connected to the Western culture as well, but they didn't do Easter and Halloween in Africa, right? So why do we see, even as just individuals, African Americans, as they like to label us, why do we want to connect to the European stuff, not to the African stuff? I say, voodoo is wrong. European paganism, neo-paganism. Look up neo-paganism. You can see people still celebrate some of these gods and goddesses even to this day. But they're both wrong. But if I'm black, at least do the black ones, right? Like, I got a problem with Kwanzaa because it got Orisha and stuff. If you know about the Orisha and some of their beliefs, so that's where a lot of Kwanzaa comes from. With I can't think of the red candles. It's actually a Orisha god, right? So it's wrong, but at least you're connecting to black people stuff, right? But why do we connect to European stuff? It just blows my mind. Chinese people do Chinese stuff, right? People from India, I got family from India, they do India stuff. But why do we connect to European stuff when we're not Europeans, right? And then even the ones that was there in Spain and Portugal, some of our people did come from Spain and Portugal, but they were called the Jews and Mason. They weren't called Messianic. I forgot, Nazarenes. They were called, and they were kicked out into slavery, sent to slaves because of their beliefs. So, we got to be very careful about what we believe and what we accept and understand the purpose of these things. So, with that said, we're going to do unholy, spiritual, pagan holidays. It's a lot of stuff to come to these, so we'll go through some of them. And then I'll come back next week, y'all willing, and do some of the rest of them. And also try to connect, because all these have a spirit of worship attached to them. And we can understand why America, to me, is breaking down, because we've rejected Yah, or we try to mix in Yah with their God with these other things, right? So, all right. So next slide. So this is a scripture that I read at the very beginning, right? Talking about Deuteronomy 11. And Yah basically was talking to our ancestors about the children of Israel before they enter into the land. You know, they're out there with Moses and they're going forth from Egypt, bondage, right? Getting away from the Egyptian gods, right? So, and going to serve Yah in a way that he deserves as the only God, the only El, right? So, in the same way, that's why I say we need to pull away in the same sense, pull away from all these gods, right? That's basically influence. I think there was a TV show called American Gods. I should have put that. Maybe I'll put that in there next week. I didn't think about it till now. But American Gods, right? And they went through the different holidays and they showed you, even from a secular sense. Now I didn't watch the show. I don't watch a lot of secular stuff with cursing and stuff. So I'm only telling you about little brief clips that I saw. But they had stuff like Easter and stuff like that. A goddess named Easter and stuff, of these, and they're telling you, they're putting it right in your face to let you know that there is a gods that's connected to these holidays, right? And to these celebrations. So Yah was telling us, even with the Egyptian gods, there was a breaking away. Some people talked about, the plagues that was given to Egypt was connected to the different gods that Yah was showing that he was stronger than, right? Like, so there was, a lot of the things that Yah was showing, keeping his people in Goshen protected while he was attacking the Egyptians to let them go. So that goes back to prophecies around Ezekiel 20 when he says he's going to do it again. He's going to bring us out with a strong arm and an outstretched hand, or I always get those two confused, but he will pull us out just like he did before. So it's very important for us to understand that, and that our hearts now is what he's trying, because even then he says to serve him with your heart and all your soul, right? And even Yahusha says, serving with all your heart, mind, and soul, right? Like we should, and even in some scripture says might, all your actions, your might, your ability to live. So, are we doing that when we start talking about our worship? Are we worshiping when we're in, culture, and the things that we do is part of our worship? When you're in church, you're singing, it's part of your worship. When you're involved in these feast days, it's part of our worship. So in the same thing, holidays is a part of worship. How does Yah look at that? It's not how we look at it. It's when he's looking down on the earth, how does he look around, right? So in verse 16 it says, beware that your hearts are not deceived, and that you turn away and serve other gods and worship them. So he's saying there's a deception that happens. It's not something that could be easily done. It's like he's talking to Israelites that just got pulled out of Egypt with all these plagues, and now he's saying, don't let your hearts be deceived, that you will turn away and serve these other gods and worship them. And he said, if you did what? Verse 17, or the anger of Yahuwah will be kindled against you. He said he's a jealous, right? Just like a person with their spouse. They don't want their spouse to just go all that. That's the book of Hosea, right? That he basically shows how we have left him, like a prostitute almost, going around and with all these other gods, and yet then we want his blessings. But yet he shows how faithful he is, that he wants to go back and get us back again now that we've done all that wrong. Now that we've been assimilating all these different cultures, not just here in America, but all across the world. He wants to pull us out again to make us his own. And that's the reason why once we learn these things, right, he said, make sure, these things are pressed on your mind and your heart and your soul, and bind them on your hand and your front of your forehead and your memory, right? So you shall teach to your sons, right? So it's a generational thing. We should teach these things, these feast days. That's the reason why he said, do them perpetually, do them forever, right? So that way everybody remember what he did for us. If we talk about all those feast days, about the significance of Passover, the significance of unleavened bread and removing the sin out of your life, and even talking about Feast of Trumpets, how he's going to come back and atone for the land and for his people, right? So that's the reason why we need to teach him to our next generations, so when we pass on, that they can still have the memory of his coming back again. But what about when it comes to the unholy days, right? Isn't that how they learn, how those things continue to perpetuate within our communities? Because now we learned about this man coming down the chimney, right? So now we want to share it with our children. So now it's being passed on. These traditions being passed on. False pagan traditions are being passed on from generation to generation to generation. And then we wonder why Yah is, kind of had his hands off of us now, right? Why the nation is tore up, why our people are being persecuted, right? Like we feel like we're not protected. But isn't Yah the one that said, dude, he's jealous, like treat me, honor me, and I'll take care of you? but yet we're doing things that's contrary to what he taught us, right? So, and we pass it on from children to children, just like during the time of Noah, how the things kept on getting worse and worse until he had to destroy the whole earth. And he said he's going to do it next time with fire, right? We're reading through Peter. Oh, well, we just finished First and Second Peter in Bible study. So says that he's with fires, the burn up the elements, right, of the world. Like he's gonna burn everything and start back over again. So go to the next slide. And he says in verse 22, for if you are careful to keep all the commandments which I'm commanding you to do, to love. It goes back to our love for Yah. How much do we truly love Yah? If a person is out there whoremongering and doing drugs or working out late and never spending time with their spouse, they're gonna have to say, I'm gonna have to change my ways. I'm gonna have to show you how much I truly love you. All these other things don't mean anything to me. I'm going to be devoted to you as my spouse. But when it comes to Yah, we act like, well, when I say some, when we go in Christianity, especially some that's coming out or any other belief, we're like, we still got our hand on that other outside influence, right? Um that work husband, as some people call them, right? Or work wives. Like we have a connection to those people, and might be doing something on the side when we at work, and then when we come home, everything's okay. Like that's not devoted to your spouse, right? Um, so Yah wants the same thing with him, right? He wants us to be totally devoted to him. And then when we are, then there's going to be blessings for us as well. So he says, those are the blessings and the curses. So he even talks about that, right? He talks about the blessings that if you do this, I'm gonna make you a great nation. But if you don't listen to me in verse 28, and the curse, if you do not listen to the commandment of Yahuwah your El, and turn aside from the way I'm commanding you today, but follow other gods which you have not known. So they didn't even know who these gods were, right? And they come into these places of the Canaanites and they start teaching about Baal and all this other worship, sun worship, and then they get caught up. Sounds like us, right? We didn't even know nothing about these gods when we're in Africa and our little tribes already getting kicked out of Israel, and we're already moving to West Africa and South Africa and East Africa and Central Africa. We're in our little tribes now. These Europeans are coming and getting us and telling us that we need to start celebrating these holidays and doing stuff. It's like we didn't even know anything about these gods, right? So he said, don't follow these guys. Now we need to return back to him. And he placed it as a memory by doing the blessings on Mount Gerizim and the curses on Mount Ebal. So he showed us, when we walked into the land, he had Gerizim, and we talked about this when we talked about the covenant. So this is actually the slide I was using. So if we go to the next slide, he then talks about, the blessings and the curses, Deuteronomy 28. Right, so he said he's going to be on those two mountains. He's going to have the blessings and curses, and as we go through that, we're going to basically accept the covenant, our ancestors, saying that all the people shall answer and say, Amen. You see that right there, Deuteronomy 27, verse 15. Right, it says, "Cursed be the man that maketh any graven and molten image, an abomination unto Yahuwah, the work of the hands of the craftsman, put it in a secret place." So he starts pronouncing these curses when the children of Israel, the tribes that they have there, they start announcing these curses as our ancestors start going to the land of Egypt, because we accepted the covenant that he called us to be his holy people, the Mamluket Kohanim, the kingdom of priests, a holy nation unto him. Right? So holy means set apart, that we're not involved in other things other than the things that he's called us to do. Next slide. So we talked about this already. So these are the blessings and curses in Deuteronomy 27. This is Moses telling the people what to do. And he charged the people. He said, keep all these commandments that I command you today. So it's all this. Remember what I told you to do, what God's told you to do when you came off the mountain and you became a people. And then he started breaking down the things of what Mount Ebal. And then he started going down into, you shall build there an altar, right? And then they start saying these blessings and curses, right? So then he starts saying, be silent and listen, O Israel. This day you have become a people for Yahuwah your El. And you shall therefore obey Yahuwah your El and do his commandments and statutes that I command you today. So what did he give them? He gave them the laws, right? The laws and the commandments. All right. So next. So it's like I said before, these are the places that still stand to this day as a memory, as something sealed in history. The mountain Ebal and Gerizim being there even to this day. So this is a memory. Like he did have a covenant with us. We did accept this covenant, and now what are we doing now? So next. And then, Mount Gerizim says, "Cursed be those who dishonor his father and mothers." And people shall say, Amen. So he's telling them what they were going to do to accept this covenant and say, hey, if you do these curses, then these are the things that's going to happen to you, right? So he even talks about curse, verse 15. Cursed is the man who makes an idol, a molten image, an abomination to Yahuwah, the works of his hands, and the craftsman who sets it up in secret. And all the people shall say, answer and say amen. So we know idolatry was wrong. It's not just how people try to make saying, oh, idolatry. It just means whatever's in your heart that you do wrong. Or it could be like you wash your car too much. No, that could be an idol, but not just a spiritual idol, but like true idols, true gods, false gods that they were basically worshiping and setting up as figures of worship. So in the same way, the Romans had, and Greeks and other Europeans, actually Celts, had certain gods that they set up as idols of worship, and as part of that, they acknowledged through their feasts and their holidays and so forth, right? All right, so next. So this is the same thing, Mount Gerizim. So next talks about some of those things, and then it talks about Deuteronomy 28, right? So that's where it says the blessings. If we do what's right, then he's going to bless us, right? With these things, he says in that very first verse, now it should be if you diligently obey Yahuwah, your El, being careful to do all his commandments, which I command you today, Yahuwah, your El, will set you high above all the nations of the earth. And then he pronounces all those blessings because he's called us out to be a holy people, in verse 9, and that holy means set apart people, that we're not doing everything what everybody else is doing. We're set apart, as he swore to you, right? That he wants to establish us as those people. So all the earth will see that you are called by the name of you, and that's prophecy, right? So now that we've been sent out there, he's going to raise us back up, so everybody can see that who he is more than who we are. It's not just attention being on us, but it's about those who's going to live holy that he's going to put back into on Mount Zion, so that way the world can see that his establishment of his creation and who he is as the only true God will be on the earth forever, right? So that's the reason why he was saying in verse 13, he says, the Yahuwah will make you the head and not the tail. You will only be above, and you will not be underneath, if you listen to the commandments of Yahuwah your El, which I charge you today to observe them carefully, and do not turn aside from any of the words which I command you today, to the right or to the left, or to go after other gods to serve them. Right? So he has a very specific, very strong opinion about our connections to worshiping other gods in any way. All right, so next. So here we are in the Roman culture. This is very important to understand some of the feast days. I'm sorry, forgive me, y'all. Some of the holidays that we do today. You got to understand Roman culture because Europeans come from Rome, they come from Britain, they come from the Celts. So you got to understand some of their understanding of their early religions and some of these early festivals that they had. They are feast days, but they're unholy feast days. So I try to separate feast days and festivals and try to use different words. But so if you understand the Roman culture, according it says Roman mythology, right? The person who basically started Rome was Romulus, and he had a twin brother named Remus, right? And they were supposed to be sons of Rhea by the god Mars. So we got Mars, Rhea. They had Romulus, and what was the other one named? Remus. Remus died; he was murdered. But Romulus ended up becoming over the Romans. So that's why they got Romans, Romulus. You can kind of make that connection, right? And then Mars was the god of war. And basically, he was the son of Jupiter. You got to remember this stuff. And Juno. If you even hear Juno, what does Juno sound like? June, the month of June, right? Mars sounds like March, right? You got M-A-R, March. Juno, June, March. Hopefully, you start making some of these connections as we continue on. So Jupiter was the father of Mars. So remember, I said Jupiter, right, was the god that the Romans looked upon. It was Jupiter ended up becoming Zeus, right? So a lot of those connections. He was the high god. I said Hadrian took a statue of Jupiter and put it on the top of the Temple Mount, right? So you can see some of those connections there also. But Mars was a god, and he basically wanted to, how they do, try to impregnate one woman or something, but he wanted to impregnate Rhea. And Rhea was a daughter of a king that had been lost his throne to his brother, and his brother didn't want his brother. Well, the evil brother didn't want his dead brother's line to continue. So the story says that he made her a virgin, like a virgin that could not have any more children. But Mars said, "No, I'm going to." Some people say he raped Rhea. Some people said he coerced her to have a child by him, and she ended up having these two, Romulus and Rhea. Right. So when that happened, she had to hide them because they were supposed to be killed. And what happened is, I guess, nature, the she wolf at the top, end up taking care of them, and you can see them supposed to be drinking from her milk. And so that is called lupa in Latin, she wolf. And she ends up becoming, the she wolf actually becomes a symbol of Rome as well. And then they grow up, and then they defeat their uncle, and Romulus ends up becoming king of Rome. So some people think Romulus was a real person. Then all this mythology kind of came later. Some people think it's the whole story is mythology, but we know that it was called Rome for some reason, right? That came out of the Etruscans later on in Italy. So you got to understand this part of the story. I'm going to go a little bit more into it because it makes important, because like I said, it's worship, right? What are they worshiping when they do these days, these holidays? So next. So I don't know. Okay, I must have put this out of place. But anyway, Juno, as I said, she was connected to Hera. You might have heard of Hera in Greek mythology. She was the goddess of love and marriage. She was a sister of uh, of Jupiter, right? Her husband, and so incest is going on. They had Mars there, and that's what Mars was like, the one of the gods of arm of war and stuff like that. So her side is a peacock, which I think is interesting, because which one is it? Is it NBC that has the peacock thing? So I always wondering why they had a peacock there, but I don't know if it's connected or not. But then it talks about the excrucian, right? The excrucians. We talked about that earlier on when we were talking about prophecy of Daniel, and start talking about the different animals and stuff. Remember, I talked about the excrucians and how they were connected to the leopards. They were leopard worshippers. So I mean, they had a temple for leopards and a lot of stuff. So I broke that down, but that's the reason why I highlighted that for those that's been with us for a while. But she also watched over the women of Rome. So she was a feminine kind of deity for women, a sign for women. She was called the queen, and she was a member of their triad, the Trinity. So that's important to also kind of look at. But they actually will worship on Capitoline Hill. So Capitol Hill, doesn't that sound familiar? Capitol Hill, Capitoline Hill. So that's the reason why America has Capitol Hill, if you just look at the history and understand that, and why it's also important for the prophecy of Daniel as well. But we won't go into that. But the Trinity for them was Juno, Jupiter, and Minerva, the goddess of wisdom. So I'm not going over it here, but Minerva, if you look at the sorority, the Deltas, at the top of their shield, they have Minerva there. So that's very interesting for African Americans to have a European Roman god at the top of their shield for African Americans. So, look into it. So, but they say they're Christian. So, what's going on there? So, but nevertheless, you see there, Minerva is connected to a lot of stuff. If you just type in Minerva, even like the Medal of Honor given to military people, you'll see Minerva up there. My daughter, she goes to UNC G school, and they have a Minerva goddess statue right there in the midst of them. Even on their sign, they have a Minerva god. goddess there in their logo. So you can see Minerva is really all over America, and people don't realize, even in federal buildings, you'll see her and everything else. So, and like I said, Jupiter is the same as Zeus, that they actually connected. Then you have this Juno, right? So Juno, June, you start having this month that that the Romans connected to their queen, right? That was over feminine people, all right, over women. All right, so next. And then you have Jupiter. So I already talked a lot about him. He ended up becoming the major god of the Roman people. Oh, I didn't know he was next. Let's go to the next slide. Realize that. So I just pulled pictures off, and then every time they got some naked god statue or something. So I'm sorry about that. But he was brothers with Jupiter. Jupiter was brothers with like Mars and all the planets, where we get the name of the planets and all that stuff from. So you can see how even the planets and stuff are impressed with, are having an impression of Roman religion, right? So element to it. So once again, start connecting that with America and Europe. That's, I'm sure the Africans didn't call their planets Jupiter and stuff, even though a lot of the early understanding of planets and positioning of stars came out of Africa. It's just amazing if you really know some of that history there. And that's why I tell people, get your kids to do some more history on them. If they got to do a project, or especially on Black history, just don't get them to do, the regular George. It's still good for them to know Madam C.J. Walker and all that stuff, but try to introduce them to some stuff even outside, like Pedro, what is they called, the Nino brothers. I'm sorry, Pedro Nino, and how he got on the Mayflower. He the not the Mayflower, the Pena, the Nina, and the Santa Maria. Yeah, the boats of Columbus. He actually navigated one of the black man was navigating the ships for Columbus, showing him how to get to America. Wow, and that's in the encyclopedia. Just go get any encyclopedia or dictionary and type in Nino brothers or Pedro Nino. Try to get them to look at stuff even outside of just American history, so we can understand how we got here. But Yah had a warning about false Elohims or gods. So even though people say I honor God, you gotta like, which God are you talking about? You talking about a false God? Because Elohim means gods. So there's false gods and there's a true one, only one, Yahuwah, out of those gods. So he talks about the Sabbath, and he talks about in Exodus 23:12, 6 days you are to do your work, but on the seventh day you shall cease from labor, so that your ox and your donkey may rest, the son of your female slave, as well as your stranger, may refresh themselves. So he's saying everybody should get this day of rest, right? And people don't honor the Sabbath, right? So, but then he says in verse 13, now concerning everything which I have said to you, be on your guard and do not mention the name of other gods, nor let them be heard from your mouth. So he was trying to warn people not to get so part when you start honoring these gods, not just saying their names, because even in the Bible it talks about Marduk and Chesmon, and other gods are mentioned even in the Bible. But he's saying, like, in a way to venerate them, right? To acknowledge them, to worship them, to speak upon them favorably, like I was saying, like Minerva, right? Like it's not good to talk about, because every frat and sorority has a god, Egyptian god, that they're connected. At least Black frat are connected to Egyptian god. So he told us not to go back to Egypt, not to worship those gods, and that's exactly what we're doing now. Even to connection to the Greek gods, Minerva and stuff like that. So it's like, okay, we got to really understand what worship truly is. Is acknowledging those things by the way that we live, work, worship, how we acknowledge those gods as well. So it's interesting that when we get to it, like Easter, just look up the word Easter. It talks about it's a name of a false goddess. What does the word Easter have to do anything with the Bible of Hebrew people? So that's the reason why it's good to separate the Hebrew from the Greek and Latin, right? So when you start talking about Yah, Yahusha, right, there's Hebrew meaning behind those words. When you start talking about Jesus, even though that's a transliteration of some of the names of Joshua and stuff, but there's also another association to a lot of these names from like Christ. That means the anointed, right? But they had Seraphis Christos, and that's the reason why they were calling them Christians when they got to Damascus, because they were acknowledged, they were mocking the Greek people were mocking, the Gentiles were mocking those who went to go believe in the Messiah, the anointed one, and they mocked them by calling them Christ, as in the anointed one, from a Greek term based upon their false god, Seraphis Christos. They were mocking the people. And I learned that in seminary. So that's the reason why it's important to associate to our Hebrew culture versus what the Romans did of taking the Hebrew culture and mixing it in with the Roman and Greek culture and giving us something different, right? So they even have what we talked about, the what's the name of the um, Sol Invictus, right? So that's at the Vatican. And they basically took him, the sun god, and converted him in a way to be an image of Jesus for them. So, and they tell you exactly what it is. Sol Invictus, the sun god. So it's important for us to understand the Hebrew ways of doing stuff and what had happened to the conversion and the mixture, what they call syncretism. Look up the word syncretism. And then when they took the different religious beliefs and mixed them all in, and that's what a lot of the holidays are around, taking the Roman gods and mixing them in with the biblical beliefs, right, system. So just like they took the Egyptian gods and they turned them, and the Greek gods, and turned them into Roman gods, they basically took gods that they were already worshiping and trying to mix them into like the saints, right? So a lot of people talk about the different saints and how they, in Catholics, they acknowledge a lot of these statues and prayed to Peter and prayed to, all these different things. Take the statue and put it on the ground upside down and bury it if you want to sell your house. And like, where is that in the Bible, right? Like, so we got to be very careful to understand, when did that stuff shift, and what are we doing when we acknowledge these things now? So next slide. Let's see what time it is. All right, it's 1. So I'm just going to go through this part before I hit some of the holidays, and that way we'll have a basis for some of this as well. So the Roman months, you can see there on the left, right? So they had the different gods that was connected to each holiday, right? You see Janus, you see February, you see after, and it has I can't say all these Roman or whatever this is Latin names, but you can see how it says after Janus, after the February New Year festivals. Why are they calling February a New Year festival, right? Martius, after Mars, after the Etruscan god Apparellus. So Etruscans and Rome had a very close connection. So that's the reason why I say it's in that prophecy of Daniel. But after Maya, a god, what does Maya sound like? May, the month of May, right? After Juno, the goddess June, right? We should talk about Juno, who was married to Jupiter and had the god Mars, right? So Julius, after Julius Caesar, right? Then it says original Quintilla or something. Augustus, original Septilla, after the emperor, right? So Augustus ended up getting named after the Emperor Augustus. And then September, you can see September is the 7th month, even though we don't count it as the 7th, we count it as the 9th month. October is the 8th month, November is the 9th month, December is the 10th month. So you can see something's going on there, right? Something's got changed. So we know Julius Caesar even before him, but a lot of people credit him back to that prophecy in Daniel, talking about he would change times and seasons and so forth. So a lot of people credit him during that. I think in Daniel he's actually there, but you have to kind of go to that teaching for me to try to show you where I think he pops up in that Daniel 11. But then on the right side, you can see even our days of the week are associated to different ways of some of these gods and goddesses as well, right? So Sunday, remember I was talking about Day Solus Day. Remember I talked about the reason why Constantine changed it to worship the sun Sunday, so there's evidence. Just go back and look and see some of the evidence why, not Julius Caesar, Constantine, why he changed that, right? So you got Moon Day, right? You look up some of these gods there. Mars Day. So Mars, once again, name is popping up. Mercury Day, Jupiter Day, Venus Day, Saturn Day. So these are gods, not just planets. We think of the day now of planets and stuff in the sky, but they were thinking about worshiping these gods, right? So then you can see on the middle column, I think that's during the time of the Celts, they start calling, Woden, or the Odin is Mercury. Thor as we know, that's on Marvel stuff, is Jupiter. It's very interesting that they hold him in high esteem in a lot of these Marvel movies, right? And then Frigg is Venus. So, Twee is Mars. So, now we can see where we get names Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So we still got these names of these gods in our mouths, right? Like it's hard to go around and say today is the fourth day, right? So because it's not, people don't understand that. So that's another reason why it's important for us to understand our own calendars and our own seasons that Yah has given us to point back to prophecy going to the last days. But then you also see that the calendar in the bottom left side, the calendar by Romulus, you can see that they only had 10 months. And what was the first month that they started? It was Mars, right? Because Mars was their war god, their high god, the son of Jupiter. And then they counted down, and you can count 10 months. Mars, April, May, June. Inus, as you can see, that actually means which one to say? Let me see. It was after Junos, but I think that means no. Quintilis. Quintilis means 5, right? Sextilis means 6. September means 7. October is 8. November 9. December decimal point is 10. So you can see how they had those. So if we even go to a regular calendar on the right side, right? If we start with September being 7, and then when they change the months on the calendar to have 12 months instead of 10 months, right? You got September, October, November, December. Then you add 2 more months, January, February. They're beginning their year used to start in March because their god Mars. So they didn't start the New Year was not celebrated in early Rome during January. It was celebrated in March because that was the time that started the new year, right? Because it's spring and something's changing. The season is changing. In the middle of June, there's no season changing. It's the middle of June. It's still cold. Nothing changed. January. Nothing changed in the middle of January, right? It's still cold outside. Things still dying. And it's the middle of the winter. Why did it change to January? All right, so next. And this is just to talk about Quintilis. It talks about it's the Latin name for fifth. So Quintilis was the fifth month. And later on, after Julius Caesar, I learned through this myself. I was told Julius Caesar basically named it after himself, but doesn't look to be true. Basically, after his death, they acknowledge him by changing the month of Quintilis to, Julius or July. So it was out because, what he did. But Quintilis was under the guardianship of the Roman supreme deity Jupiter. So once again, they had all these connections back to this gods and what was going on with their worship of these Roman gods and their calendar. So next. And then Sextilis, what talks about is the 6th month, right? And if you count from March or Mars month, you'll start getting to that 6th month, right? And because it was a 10-day calendar. And then later on, it became the 8th month. And it still had the same name, Sextilis, until the Emperor Augustus came about. And he was truly the first Roman emperor. I think before that, they count Julius Caesar and all them as kings or something. But he was the first Roman emperor of that empire. So they basically honored him with the month of August, and that's how he got his name. So you can go into there and stop it and read more about it there. All right, or go on Wikipedia. So next. So you can see here how we get the original names of the months that we are now. January is a god named Janus. February is a Roman festival of February. What does that mean, right? Like, just look at the names of the month. March means Mars. April, they say unknown, but on the right, you see I found something where it says Aprilis was derived from prio, Latin verb meaning to open. The month is so called because it is the month when the earth opens to produce new fruit. So, I guess it means spring is coming forth and harvest and all that. But May is Maya. You ever look up the goddess Maya? Who is she? June, Juno. July, as we just said, Julius Caesar, Augustus. We just said what that was. And even like some of the Jupiter was born during the time. Well, from their understanding, was around July. So there's a lot of connections there for them. And then we got the numbers. September is 7, October is 8, November is 9, December is 10, even though they did change positions. They didn't change names. So you know that September is the 9th month, October is the 10th month, December is 11th month. I mean, November is 11th month, December is the 12th month. So that's where we are now. So all these months, these things, these gods are all over our names. When we talk about months, we talk about weeks, we talk about planets. A lot of stuff that we're talking about, Capitol Hill, all this stuff is Roman religion or Greek religion, stuff that came out of there, or Celtic religion. So that's the reason why it's not just trying to be funny or trying to be racial, but we live in Britain, which is a European nation that used to serve European gods. So you have to look at it that way when it comes to who we are as a people. We are Hebrew Israelites, right? The Israelites of the Bible that Yah told us to separate from these things, right? Not to allow these Gentile cultures to get us caught up in it, right? So we won't be held accountable for his wrath and his jealousy by serving other gods, other Elohims. All right, so next, I think that's where, yeah, so we'll start here next week, but let's start going through some of these days, right? So it talks about how, you know, they talked about this last week, about the Gregorian calendar, how things changed from January, how they used to celebrate things on March as the spring, and now after Julius Caesar, he started having us to do it in January, and there's a reason for that, right? So go back a slide. All right, so we got to understand now, we got a basic understanding of where this stuff comes from, right? We have a Hebrew culture. We understand our feast days based upon the moon, right? So in the sun and the rotations and how all that's connected, because he said, look at the sun, the stars, and moons as signs for seasons, right? For days. So Yah is basically establishing who we are as he called us out of Egypt, and he gave us the first month of Bib, right? So that's your first month. You should honor, you know, this is the time that you need to remember, because this is the day I'm pulling you out of Egypt. So all this stuff is lining up for us, but now we're trying to work with that along with a Roman converted syncretism type of stuff, and it gets confusing. So, you know, they had a way that they were worshiping their gods, and we have to make sure we serve our El, our Yahuwah, because he wants us to worship him in his way, right? So we got to be very careful to understand the distinction, to understand where all this stuff started from. And now as we go into the different the different festivals, different holidays, the American holidays, we'll start seeing some connection to all this, right? So it's very important to understand this first part, because as you go into the next part, you'll start understanding why are these holidays during these months, right? These times of the years. Why do we do Valentine's Day during February, right? Why do we do make New Year's resolutions during January, right? So why do we do Mother's Day during the time of May, right? So it makes sense when you start understanding that, but it also has a spiritual connection to it as well. All right.
Come together, learn who we are here.